The silence of the house was a shroud, thicker and colder than the autumn air pressing against the glass. It had been 7 months since I'd last heard her laugh, a sound like wind chimes in a summer breeze, now replaced by this oppressive, absolute quiet. 7 months since the accident. Every room in my old apartment had echoed her absence, each familiar object a sharp shard of memory. I couldn't stay. The walls were closing in, the very air stale with unspoken grief. So, when the solicitor's letter arrived, crisp and official, detailing the inheritance from my estranged grandmother, it felt less like an opportunity and more like a desperate command. A remote Victorian manor, miles from anywhere, a place I'd never seen, never even known existed. It was a reprieve, I told myself, a clean slate. The drive had been endless, the city's concrete arteries slowly dissolving into winding country lanes, then gravel tracks choked by overgrown hedges. The landscape grew wilder, the trees taller, their bare branches clawing at the bruised sky. My old sedan groaned with the weight of my meager possessions, each bump in the road rattling the few boxes in the trunk. I kept seeing her face in the passenger seat, her smile, the way her hair caught the light. It was a futile effort. He was everywhere. He was nowhere. A flicker of an old, unsettling memory surfaced then, unbidden, like a splinter under the skin. A few weeks after everything happened, during the bewildering haze of the initial inquiries, I'd been asked to identify something. Not her, not directly, but an object. The official had called it a temporary holding facility. It wasn't a morgue, not exactly. More like a vast, empty warehouse near the docks. A memory of a cargo ship, a skeleton crew, and the persistent, nauseating scent of brine and something else, something metallic and sweet, clung to that image. I hadn't understood why I was there, why they were asking me about a particular manifest, a single crate. It had all blurred into the general horror. I shook my head, trying to dislodge it. Focus, just focus on the road. The manor emerged from the gloom like a jagged tooth, silhouetted against the bruised horizon. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, snaked across the facade, wrestling with the peeling paint and crumbling mortar. The gate, a rusted lacework of iron, hung half open, groaning a protest as I nudged it further with the bumper. No one had been here in years, that much was clear. The gravel driveway crunched under my tires, leading to a wide, neglected courtyard. My grandmother, I mused, must have been a recluse, or perhaps simply forgotten. The house certainly felt forgotten. I killed the engine, and the sudden quiet was profound, broken only by the distant caw of a crow and the rustle of dry leaves skittering across the flagstones. A shiver traced its way down my spine, unrelated to the dropping temperature. Stepping out, the air was heavy, damp, and carried the faint, earthy scent of decay mixed with something else. Something subtly metallic, like old blood or rust. The front door, a monstrous slab of oak studded with black iron, was unlocked. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of weak sunlight, piercing a high, grimy window. I walked into the hall, my footsteps echoing unnervingly on the patterned tile floor. To my left, a grand staircase, its banister carved with intricate, unsettling patterns, swept upwards into the gloom. To my right, a series of closed doors, hinting at unseen rooms. Everything was draped in white sheets, ghostly figures standing sentinel in the dim light. My fingers brushed against a sheet, pulling it back from what felt like a tall, narrow cabinet. It was a grandfather clock, its face frozen at 10 minutes past 3. Its pendulum, a dull brass crescent, hung motionless. I tapped the glass, but no movement. It had stopped long ago. As I let the sheet fall, I caught a glimpse of something else on the floor, half hidden by the drape. It had clearly fallen from the cabinet or perhaps been placed there. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, tarnished silver locket. It was heavy, strangely warm to the touch. I opened it. On one side, a miniature, sepia-toned photograph of a stern-faced woman, my grandmother, I presumed. As I stared at it, a faint, almost imperceptible hum seemed to resonate from the depths of the house, a vibration that settled deep in my bones. Or was something else here, waiting? The word finality clung to the air, thick and metallic, like the taste of old pennies on my tongue. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again, forcing my gaze away from the dust motes dancing in the slivers of weak afternoon light. This was it. No turning back, no other option. My sanctuary or my tomb. The grand foyer stretched before me, a mausoleum of forgotten grandeur. The air was frigid, holding the scent of damp earth and something else, something vaguely sweet and cloying, like wilting flowers left too long in a vase. My boots scuffed against the worn parquet, each step echoing unnaturally in the cavernous space. I told myself it was just the acoustics of an old house, just the house. To my left, a set of heavy, carved double doors stood ajar. I pushed one open further, the hinges groaning in protest, a sound that seemed to tear at the oppressive quiet. This must have been the drawing room. Sunlight, filtered through grime-streaked panes, cast the room in a perpetual twilight. Velvet drapes, once crimson, now hung in faded, threadbare tatters, barely clinging to their ornate rods. The furniture, draped in white sheets that had yellowed with age, resembled a congregation of ghosts, waiting for a sermon that would never begin. I pulled back a sheet from what felt like a grand piano. Its keys were yellowed, some chipped, mute witnesses to decades of silence. Beneath a film of dust, a silver-framed photograph lay face down. I picked it up, blowing gently, watching the dust motes swirl and settle. It was a formal portrait, sepia-toned, of a stern-faced woman with eyes that seemed to bore into my own, even from the past. My grandmother. Her lips were a thin, unsmiling line. Beside her, a man I didn't recognize, his gaze equally severe, almost accusatory. I set the photograph back down, face up this time, and moved deeper into the room. A floorboard creaked above me. I paused, listening. The house settling, I reasoned, or perhaps a rodent. It was an old place, after all. Just drafts, I told myself, the way old houses breathe. I continued my exploration, moving from one silent room to the next. The dining room, with its massive, dust-shrouded table, felt like a stage set for a feast that had ended centuries ago. The kitchen, surprisingly small for such a grand house, held a rusting cast-iron stove and a faint, lingering smell of something akin to burnt sugar and rot. Faces I didn't know, distant relatives whose lives were now reduced to faded pigments and stiff poses. Their eyes, always their eyes, seemed to follow me, reflecting the dim light from the landing window. I tried to ignore the feeling, the prickle at the back of my neck. At the far end of the hall, a door stood slightly ajar. My grandmother's room, I presumed. I pushed it open slowly. The air inside was thick, stagnant, carrying a stronger trace of that sweet, cloying scent, now mixed with mothballs and something else, something metallic and sharp, like old blood or rust. Just rust, I corrected myself. The room was sparse, almost austere, despite its size. A four-poster bed, stripped bare, stood against one wall. I walked towards the desk, my boots sinking slightly into the thick, dusty carpet. On its surface, among stacks of yellowed correspondence and ledgers filled with elegant, spidery script, lay a small, leather-bound journal. Its cover was embossed with a faded, intricate design that seemed to writhe beneath my fingers. I picked it up, the leather surprisingly supple despite its age. It fell open to a page near the middle, the ink faded but still legible. My eyes scanned the elegant handwriting. It detailed a voyage, dates from the late 1800, October 14th. The Leviathan, a cargo ship, skeleton crew. The North Atlantic, a churning black expanse. It is the hold, the sounds that echo from below decks. A scratching, then a guttural, wet thrumming. The first mate, a stoic man named Thomas, spoke of a curious shipment. He would say no more. But the fear in his eyes was a language I understood. Something in the hold stirs. I hear it even through the hull. It sings a low, discordant note, a song meant for no living ear, and I fear. I closed the journal abruptly, my fingers trembling. It felt like a phantom hand had gripped me. I spun around, my breath catching, but saw nothing. Just the dusty room, the empty bed, the silent portraits. My mind was playing tricks. Grief, stress, the unsettling atmosphere of the house, it was all combining, distorting my perceptions. It wasn't a language I recognized, more a sibilant hiss, a breathy, formless sound that seemed to emanate from the very walls. On the floor beside the desk, partially hidden by a trailing drape, I saw it. A chest. Its surface was intricately carved, depicting intertwining vines and flowers, but the craftsmanship was unsettlingly precise, almost too perfect. And in the center of the lid, A heavy, ornate lark glinted dully. What secrets did it guard? The chest, when I finally knelt before it, was smaller than I'd first thought, yet its presence felt impassably heavy. The wood was so dark it drank the light, surface polished to a dull sheen that reflected my own anxious face like a warped mirror. Brass bands, tarnished green in places, crisscrossed its lid, secured by a single stout clasp. No lark, just a catch stiff with age. My fingers hesitated, hovering over the cold metal. A faint scent like dried herbs and forgotten paper seemed to emanate from its seams, clinging to the air around me. Was it the dust of the house or something else entirely? I pressed the clasp. It gave with a soft click that echoed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. The lid lifted with a groan of ancient hinges, revealing an interior lined with faded velvet, a deep, bruised purple. Inside, nested amongst brittle tissue paper, lay a jumble of objects. Yellowed letters tied with decaying ribbon. A silver locket, tarnished black. A small porcelain doll, its painted eyes staring blankly upwards. And beneath it all, a leather-bound journal, its pages thick and discolored. My grandmother's things, undoubtedly. A chill traced its way up my spine, despite the stagnant warmth of the room. This wasn't just an inheritance, it felt like an invitation. I carefully lifted the journal. Its cover was smooth, worn from countless readings. Not a sound I could pinpoint, more a sensation like a breath against my skin, the ghost of a voice. William, my hand froze. The journal slipped, thudding softly back into the chest. Nothing. The curtains hung still. The old furniture stood silent. My breath caught in my throat, a ragged gasp. It was just grief, I told myself, the mind playing tricks. Exhaustion. My wife's name, echoing in the cavern of my own despair. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing the heels of my hands against them, trying to banish the sensation. When I opened them, the room still swam with phantom shapes, but the sound was gone. Or had it ever been there? I picked up the journal again, my hands trembling. The first few pages were filled with elegant, looping script, detailing mundane events, garden plantings, visits from a local tradesman. But further in, the entries grew sparser, the handwriting more erratic. There were sketches, 2 rough charcoal drawings of strange, geometric patterns that seemed to shift and waver the longer I stared at them. One entry, dated decades ago, caught my eye. The Voyage, the Persephone. My grandmother had written it. A cargo ship skeleton crew. They brought it back, something in the hold. A cargo ship. What was she talking about? What it? The words swam before my eyes, the ink seeming to pulse with a faint, malevolent light. Then, from the periphery of my vision, I saw her. A shimmering, indistinct form standing by the doorway, her silhouette undeniably my wife's. Her hair, the curve of her shoulder, the way she used to lean against the door frame, watching me. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, it just was. A silent accusation, a yearning made manifest. My eyes burned. I blinked hard, rubbing them roughly. When I looked again, the doorway was empty. This was too much. This was not grief. This was something else, something trying to unravel me. I needed a tether, a voice from the world I knew. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy. My colleague, Mark. He was logical, grounded. Mark answered, his voice gruff, preoccupied. William, everything all right? Haven't heard from I in a while. Mark, I choked out, my voice tight. I think I'm losing it, this house. I keep seeing things, hearing things, him. There was a pause, a sigh. William, look, I know this is hard. What I re going through, it's normal. Grief does strange things to the mind. I re isolated up there. Maybe I should consider coming back, getting some rest. He didn't believe me. I could hear it in his dismissive tone, the way he hurried on. Listen, I'm swamped here. The new project's a nightmare. Just try to get some sleep, okay? Maybe take a walk. The dial tone buzzed, a marking, empty sound. I was alone, truly alone. As I stared at the phone, a low hum started, vibrating through the floorboards, through the very air. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It was organic, like 1,000 insects buzzing in unison, yet deeper, resonating in my bones. The pages of my grandmother's journal, still open in the chest, began to flutter, though there was no breeze. And then, the faint scent of lilies, my wife's favorite flower, bloomed in the room, so strong it made my head spin. I could feel my own breath clouding in front of me, and through it all, louder now, clearer, came her voice. You shouldn't have opened it, William. I stumbled back, knocking over the small, ornate desk chair. My eyes were wide, fixed on the journal on the chest. The hum intensified, a vibrating pressure building behind my eyes. The scent of lilies grew overpowering, sickening. My hands flew to my ears, trying to block out the sound, the voice, the suffocating presence. What had she brought back on that ship? What exactly had I just unleashed? My hands flew to my ears, pressing hard against my temples, trying to shut out the vibrating hum that clawed at my brain. It wasn't a sound I could hear with my eardrums, but a pressure, a frequency that resonated deep inside my skull, making my teeth ache. The cloying sweetness of the lilies intensified, a thick, suffocating blanket that tasted of decay on my tongue. The ornate desk chair lay overturned, a silent accusation on the polished floorboards. My breath hitched, caught somewhere between my throat and my lungs. Fear, cold and sharp, had seized me, but beneath it, a desperate, gnawing curiosity had begun to take root. This wasn't just a house of echoes and shadows. This was something else, something active. I forced myself to breathe shallow, ragged gasps that did little to clear the lily scent from my nostrils. And on top of it, the journal. Its leather cover seemed to pulse with the same internal hum that rattled my bones. Slowly, deliberately, I lowered my hands. The pressure behind my eyes lessened, but did not vanish. The lilies still choked the air. It felt alive, not warm, not moving, but radiating a subtle energy that prickled my skin. I picked it up. I flipped it open, the brittle paper rustling like dry leaves. The script was elegant, looping, unmistakably my grandmother's. I recognized her precise hand from old birthday cards. This wasn't a casual diary. This was a chronicle. They spoke of loneliness, of the house settling, of the occasional creak. Innocent, normal. Then the tone shifted. A rustle in the library when no one was there, a breath against my neck in the empty hall. I dismissed them, of course. An old woman's imagination, the wind, my own experience, my own dismissals. I turned another page, then another, the hum seeming to follow the movement of my hands. They are not the wind, they are voices. Indistinct at first, like a distant choir just beyond the edge of hearing. Now they are closer. They call my name, not my full name. A fragment, a sound that is not a word. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. The air in the room felt heavy, pressing down on me. Then I saw it, not in the journal itself, but on the inside of the chest lid. I ran my thumb along it, feeling a slight indentation. My heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. There, tucked away in the corner, was a tiny, almost imperceptible button flush with the wood. I pressed it. With a soft, almost inaudible click, a section of the lid sprang inward, revealing a shallow, narrow compartment. My breath hitched. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay not one journal, but a collection of smaller, leather-bound notebooks, their covers worn smooth from handling, and a single, tarnished silver locket. I pulled out the locket first. I thumbed it open. Inside, 2 faded photographs. My grandmother, younger, vibrant, and a stern-faced man I didn't recognize, his eyes holding a familiar, distant sorrow. My grandfather or another ancestor. I set it aside, my attention drawn to the notebooks. I picked up the top one. The script inside was more frantic, the ink sometimes smudged, as if written in haste or distress. The chorale, that is what I call them. They demand, they imply, they speak of a pact, a bloodline, our bloodline. My eyes widened. A pact? What pact, and with whom? The hum in the room intensified, a low thrum that seemed to vibrate the very floorboards beneath my feet. My ancestor, Elias, spoke of it in his own desperate scribblings. He was a merchant, a man of the sea. His logs, found in the attic, spoke of an impassable journey. A cargo ship, skeleton crew, something in the hold, not cargo, not living, but it pulsed. It changed them one by one. Elias jumped. He was lucky. The image, though vague, was terrifying. The sheer weight of an unknown horror, contained yet influencing on the open sea. This was not a ghost story. This was something ancient, something that touched generations. I flipped to another page, the words blurring as my eyes darted across the frantic scrawl. They want a host, always a host. The pact was made for protection, or so we were told. A terrible lie. It is a leash, a promise of servitude. They chose my mother, they chose my father, and they chose me, but I fought. I fought with every fiber of my being. I larked the house. I starved them, but they are hungry, and they are patient, and now they sense a new arrival. A new arrival, me. The notebooks tumbled from my grasp, scattering across the floor. My hands flew to my mouth, stifling a gasp. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with the scent of lilies, and something else now, something metallic, like old blood. The hum pulsed, a rhythmic throb that echoed the frantic beat of my own heart. This wasn't a haunting. This was an inheritance, a terrible, inescapable inheritance. My grandmother hadn't just been afraid. He had been fighting, and he had lost. But what had she been fighting exactly? The hum pulsed, a rhythmic throb that echoed through the very marrow of my bones, a vibration I felt more than heard. It wasn't just in the floorboards, not just in the air. It was inside me, a discordant tuning fork striking deep within my chest cavity. The notebooks, scattered testament to a past I barely understood, lay splayed across the floor. My hands, still hovering near my mouth, trembled. The lilies, once a comforting scent of remembrance, now mingled with that metallic tang, like old carper left to bleed in the rain. It was a smell I knew, a smell that had haunted my nightmares for months. The walls of the study seemed to ripple, the antique wallpaper blurring into an indistinguishable pattern of decay. The air grew thick, not just with scent, with a palpable pressure, as if the room itself was contracting, squeezing the oxygen out of my lungs. I stumbled back, my foot catching on a loose rug, and I crashed against the heavy oak desk. The impact rattled my teeth. Then the manor dissolved. One moment, the musty study. The next, a different kind of confinement. I was suddenly standing on grimy, corrugated steel, the air biding with the chill of the open ocean. A low, persistent groan resonated beneath my feet, the rhythmic shudder of an engine battling against unseen currents. The metallic tang in the air sharpened, laced now with the brine of salt spray and the acrid bite of diesel. I clutched at my chest, my breath catching. The shift was absolute, immediate. My mind screamed, "No, this isn't real." But my senses argued back with brutal clarity. I was on a cargo ship, skeleton crew, something in the hold. The deck was slick underfoot, coated in a fine sheen of mist and ocean spray. Above me, skeletal cranes reached into a sky the color of bruised plums, their cables taut, humming with a strained tension. Sparse lights, yellow and weak, cast long, dancing shadows across the rusted bulkheads and stacks of shipping containers. The wind whipped at my clothes, carrying the mournful cry of gulls, an echo of loneliness. There were no faces, no voices, just the vast, indifferent expanse of the sea and the groaning metal around me. A skeleton crew indeed. I felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the ship's own slow, grinding rhythm. My eyes darted, searching for a familiar landmark, a clue to this impassable transition. Nothing. Only the endless grey of the ocean, stretching to a horizon swallowed by low-hanging cloud. My breath plumed in the cold air. This wasn't a dream. It called to me, a silent, insistent summons. The hum intensified, emanating from below. I found myself moving towards it, my legs stiff, each step a conscious effort. I descended, rung by rusted rung, into the belly of the ship. This was the hold, vast, empty. My voice was trapped in my throat, a dry rasp. The hum was a roar now, vibrating through the metal structure of the ship, shaking the very ground beneath my feet. The floor was wet here, a shallow film of oily water reflecting the dim light like fractured mirrors. And then I saw it. In the center of the cavernous hold, bathed in the sickly glow of a single dangling bulb, stood a form. It was indistinct at first, a shimmering distortion in the air, like heat rising from asphalt. But it solidified, coalesced, drawing the light into itself. My breath hitched. It was her. My wife. Her hair, once a cascade of warm auburn, was now a tangled mass, dull and lifeless, lasted to her face. Her dress, the same delicate silk she'd worn on our last anniversary, was torn and stained, clinging to a form that was too thin, too angular. Her skin, once so vibrant, was stretched taut, a papery pallor. And her mouth was wrong. Stretched too wide, a grotesque parody of a smile, revealing too many teeth, too sharp, too long. It was her voice, distorted, malevolent. I left me. My vision swam. No, this wasn't real. It couldn't be. My wife was gone, dead. I had held her hand as she faded. This was a mockery, a cruel, twisted lie. I choked out, the words catching in my throat. I never left I. Her head tilted, a jerky, unnatural movement, her neck seeming to crack with the effort. A faint, sweet smell like lilies left to rot, wafted from her. I let me go, she accused, her voice rising, gaining a terrible strength. The hum around us intensified, shaking the very structure of the ship. I promised forever. My hands balled into fists, my grip tight. This grotesque imitation was twisting my grief, weaponizing my guilt. It knew everything. She took a step towards me, her movements stiff, puppet-like. The water on the floor rippled around her feet, but no sound accompanied her tread. I thought I could escape, William. We are bound, William, bound by blood, by grief, by memory. My legs were laid. I wanted to run, to scream, but I was frozen, trapped by the horror of her face, her accusing eyes. This wasn't a ghost. This was something else, something far worse, something that wore the skin of my beloved to torment me. She raised a hand, long, skeletal fingers reaching towards me. The hum vibrated through my chest, rattling my bones. Join us. My skin prickled. My eyes burned. But beneath the seductive promises, there was only a vast, hungry emptiness. I closed my eyes, squeezed them shut, trying to banish the image, the voice, the impassable reality of the cargo ship. When I opened them, he was closer, her face inches from mine. The putrid sweetness of lilies choked me. Her eyes were bottomless pits. I am ours, William, I screamed, a raw, guttural sound torn from the deepest part of my being. The hold blurred. The ship vanished. The hum shattered into 1,000 stinging fragments. I was back in the study, my back pressed against the splintered oak desk, gasping for air. The notebooks were still scattered on the floor. The scent of lilies was faint now, fading. But the metallic tang, that taste of old blood, lingered on my tongue. My body trembled uncontrollably. Sweat beaded on my forehead, stinging my eyes. My throat was raw, my chest heaving. It had been real, every horrifying second. It had found me. It had used her. What was it, and what did it want? The notebooks were still scattered on the floor, their pages splayed like forgotten wings. My lungs burned, each inhale a fresh agony, and a metallic tang coated my tongue. The phantom chill of the cargo ship, skeleton crew, something in the hold still clung to my skin, a clammy shroud. Had I truly been there? Had I felt the shudder of that immense hull, the impassable, crushing weight of that unseen presence in the depths? Or was it all a trick, hallucination spun from the frayed edges of my sanity? My hands trembled as I pushed myself upright, gripped tight against the desk's scarred wood. The room spun, a dizzying carousel of shadows and dust motes dancing in the weak afternoon light. My head throbbed behind my eyes, a dull, persistent ache that mirrored the emptiness in my chest. This wasn't grief anymore. I had to understand. I had to know what was happening to me, what this house truly held. I started with the desk itself, pulling open drawers long stuck, their runners groaning in protest. Dust motes, disturbed by my frantic movements, swirled in the air, catching the light like tiny, malevolent stars. Each breath brought the scent of aged paper and something else, something cloying and sweet, like dried flowers mixed with rot. My fingers, clumsy with adrenaline, fumbled through the papers. I wasn't looking for a will or a property transfer. My grandmother's diaries, filled with looping, elegant script, offered tantalizing glimpses. Early entries spoke of the house's peculiar atmosphere, the unsettling quiet. Later, the tone shifted. A recurring phrase caught my eye. They forget what they were. My gaze drifted to the bookshelves, towering monuments to forgotten knowledge. I dragged a heavy, leather-bound tome from its perch, sending a cascade of dust motes shimmering around me. Its title was embossed in faded gold, Local Histories and Peculiarities of the Blackwood Coast. The pages were thick and rough, smelling of damp earth and something acrid, like burnt sugar. I flipped through the index, searching for anything related to the manor, my family, or the strange occurrences. There were brief mentions of unexplained disappearances dating back centuries, particularly among the old families of the region. Gone. It spoke of a thing that fed on the past, on identity itself. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't some generic folk tale. This was too specific. They forget what they were. I found a crude woodcut depicting gnarled trees, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers, and a faint, swirling mist at their base. Below it, a single line of text, almost illegible. The chorale of echoes will make them sing. My breath hitched. The pieces were starting to fit, forming a grotesque mosaic. This wasn't just my grief. This wasn't just a haunting. This was something ancient, something that had been preying on my family for generations, hidden in plain sight. The absences, the madness, the fading memories, all of it. My grandmother hadn't been delusional. She'd been a chronicler of a horror she couldn't escape. My eyes scanned the dense text, my mind racing, trying to absorb every word, every implication. I noticed a subtle shift in the ink of some entries, as if someone had added notes much later. A small, almost invisible symbol etched beside a passage about the hunger in the woods. It was a twisted knot, a looping, impassable shape that seemed to fold in on itself. I'd seen it before, on the cover of my grandmother's personal journal. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from the hallway outside the study, loud enough to make me jump. The old house settling, I told myself, clutching the book tighter. But the sound wasn't like a house settling. It was too deliberate, too crisp, like a twig snapping underfoot. Had I left it open? The scent of damp earth, stronger now, wafted into the room. It wasn't from the book. It was from the hall. There was someone else in the house. Or was something finally coming for me? The phantom chill of the cargo ship still clung to me, a lingering dampness that sank into my bones, even here in the supposed warmth of the study. I pushed away from the splintered oak desk, my back aching, the scattered notebooks a testament to my frantic searching. My head throbbed, a dull drumbeat behind my eyes. Had I truly been on that ship, or had the house simply twisted the air around me, forcing a memory into a physical sensation? I needed to clear my head. I needed to leave. I stumbled towards the study door, my fingers fumbling for the cold brass knob. It turned with a familiar click, but the door refused to budge. I pulled, then pushed, grunting with effort. The wood remained stubbornly fixed in its frame. My breath hitched. I tried again, harder this time, a frantic rattle against the quiet. Nothing. It wasn't just stuck. It felt sealed, an extension of the wall itself. I spun, scanning the room. The tall windows, usually offering a sliver of the overgrown garden, were now opaque, coated in a thick, greasy grime that reflected only my own distorted face. There was no escape through them. The house was playing with me. I felt its eyes on me, a pressure in the air that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I moved to the fireplace, then the bookshelves, searching for any hidden latch, any secret passage that might have been mentioned in the notebooks. My mind raced, trying to recall the layout of the manor. The study opened into the main hall, then the grand staircase. If I could just get to the stairs, I could reach the front door or a window. Any window. I returned to the door, my determination hardening. This wasn't just a trick of the mind. This was a physical barrier. I pounded on the wood, shouting, "Let me out!" A low groan rumbled from somewhere deep within the house, a sound like ancient timbers shifting under immense weight. The floor beneath my feet vibrated, a subtle tremor that unnerved me more than a violent shake. The very architecture seemed to be breathing. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear anything beyond the study. A faint, rhythmic creak like a slow, deliberate swing reached me. It wasn't the wind. It was too regular, too heavy. And then a smell, brine, salt water, and decaying wood. The scent of the cargo ship. My stomach lurched. I backed away from the door, my eyes wide. The room seemed to expand, the walls pushing outwards, then sucking inwards, distorting my perception. The corners of the ceiling blurred, twisting into impassable angles. Had the room always been this long, this narrow? The desk, the hearth, the shelves, they seemed to recede, then rush towards me, making my head spin. I shut my eyes, pressing the heels of my hands against them. "Focus, William," I muttered. "It's not real, it's not real." When I opened them again, the room was subtly different. Its polished wood gleamed faintly, reflecting nothing. And the doorway I had just tried to open, was no longer there. My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled backward, tripping over something that wasn't there a moment ago. I landed hard on my backside, the impact jarring my teeth. My gaze darted around the room, frantic. The walls pulsed, a slow, almost imperceptible undulation. I scrambled to my feet, my legs unsteady. Where was the door? Where was the exit? I ran my hands over the wallpaper, desperate for a seam, a handle, anything. It was solid, unyielding. My fingers scraped against the rough texture, finding only an unbroken surface. The rhythmic creak intensified, closer now, as if just beyond the shifting walls. It was the sound of a ship's hull, groaning against heavy seas, a constant, weary complaint. And with it came the distinct scent of diesel fuel, mingling with the brine and the metallic tang. A low, guttural thrum vibrated through the floorboards, a sound that resonated deep in my chest. It felt like the beating heart of some colossal engine. My vision blurred. The study was gone, replaced by a narrow, damp corridor, dimly lit by a single caged bulb swinging precariously overhead. Rust stained the metal walls, and condensation dripped from the ceiling, collecting in oily puddles on the grimy floor. The air was thick with the smell of old oil, salt, and something rank like decaying flesh. This was the cargo ship. I was here. How? Behind me, the way I had come, was just more of the same, an identical, terrifying tunnel. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I could hear the faint, distant shouts of a skeleton crew somewhere above me, muffled by layers of steel. They were unaware of what lay below, just as I had been. The thrumming intensified, vibrating through my very bones. It was impossibly heavy, wet, and ragged. Something was in the hold, something vast and hungry. Was I truly on the ship, or was the house merely showing me a memory I had never lived, making it real? The scraping sound intensified, a wet, guttural drag that clawed at the air. It wasn't merely heavy. It felt ancient, burdened with an impossible weight, as if some colossal, waterlogged thing was being pulled across rough stone. I pressed myself harder against the damp wall, the cold seeping through my thin shirt, a futile attempt to merge with the shadows. My breath hitched, caught in my throat, each exhalation a ragged gasp that seemed to amplify the horror. Then the world lurched. Not a gentle sway, but a violent, sickening roll that threw me off balance. My head struck something hard and unyielding. Dizziness bloomed behind my eyes, painting the darkness in swirling patterns of phantom light. The air changed, growing thick with the scent of brine and rust, a metallic tang that made my teeth ache. The thrumming vibrated still, but now it felt like the pulse of a massive engine, deep beneath me, rather than something within the walls. When my vision cleared, the stone walls were gone. I was no longer in the manor's suffocating depths. The floor beneath my feet was corrugated metal, slick with condensation and grime. Stacks of crates, secured by thick chains, lined the walls, their surfaces scarred with rust. I was in a cargo ship, skeleton crew, something in the hold. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. How? When? The scraping sound was here too, closer now. It emanated from a colossal object shrouded in canvas, lashed down in the very center of the hold. The canvas, stained and stiff with age, sagged and billowed with the subtle movement of the ship. A low, rhythmic groan accompanied the scraping, like stressed timbers or something far worse. My stomach clenched. I could taste bile at the back of my throat. I forced myself forward, my hands flat against the cold metal crates, guiding me through the oppressive gloom. It was massive, easily the size of a small truck, and its contours suggested something organic, yet angular beneath the canvas. As I drew nearer, a patch of canvas shifted, revealing a glimpse of what lay beneath. A faint, cloying smell, both sweet and putrid, drifted from it, catching in my nostrils. It was the smell of long-dead things, preserved and yet still decaying. My throat constricted. My eyes, however, were drawn to the metal floor around the object. Scratched into the rust-pitted steel, crude but distinct, were symbols. Not random graffiti, but a repeating pattern of interlocking triangles and circles radiating from the canvas-shrouded mass. And between these symbols, faded but legible, were words. Latin. My grandmother had taught me a smattering of it, enough to piece together fragments. Pactum, sanguis, progenies. Pact, blood, progeny. My breath hitched. My mind, reeling from the disorientation, struggled to connect the dots. More words emerged from the grime. Anchoram, custodium, evum, anchor, custody, age. The words were interspersed with dates, scrawled in different hands, some barely visible. Generations. Each date was followed by a name, often just initials, but one leaped out at me, carved deeper than the rest, almost angrily. Elias. My great-grandfather. The one my grandmother had always refused to speak about. This wasn't a crate. This was a sarcophagus or a chrysalis, and the scraping was coming from within it. A faint, wet glistening caught the light, as if something was slowly, laboriously being drawn across a membrane. I scrambled backward, my heart racing, a frantic drumbeat against the ship's thrumming. A pact of blood passed down through generations. A bloodline bound to provide an anchor, custody of something. Eternal, the chorale of echoes. It wasn't just haunting my family, it was tethered to it, scrawled directly beneath Elias's. I wasn't just a victim. I wasn't just an inheritor of some cursed estate. I was the designated inheritor, the next anchor, the next vessel. It was the entity's patient, generational claim, slowly, inexorably tightening around me. The scraping stopped. A new sound began, a low, guttural sigh that seemed to emanate from the very air around the shrouded object. The canvas began to ripple, not from the ship's movement, but from something pushing from within. The single bulb above flickered wildly, threatening to die. What would emerge from that ancient, leathery shell, now that I had deciphered its terrible purpose? And what part of me would be left once it truly began to claim its anchor? Pact, blood, progeny. The words had etched themselves into my mind, each syllable a claw mark, tearing at the thin membrane of my sanity. Anchoram, custodium, evum. Anchor, custody, age, and the dates, chilling litany stretching back through generations, culminating in a date far too close to my own birth. I had knelt there in the grime, the cold seeping into my bones, a desperate logic taking root. If this was a pact, if I was meant to be the next host, then I had to break free. Now, before the tendrils of this ancient horror could fully claim me. The scent of dust and decay, usually a constant companion, now seemed to press in, a physical weight. I pushed myself up, my legs stiff, the tremor in my hands a persistent hum. Escape. It was the only thought that mattered. I didn't know where I was going, only that it had to be away. I stumbled through the echoing halls, the ornate wallpaper seeming to peel back further with each hurried step, revealing glimpses of a deeper art. The grandfather clock in the foyer, usually a silent sentinel, suddenly chimed, a single, deep, resonant bang that vibrated through the floorboards and up into my chest. It felt like a warning, or perhaps a pronouncement. I ignored it, fumbling with the heavy oak door. It groaned open, protesting my haste, and a blast of frigid air hit me, carrying with it the damp smell of pine needles and something else, something metallic and sharp, like old blood. My old sedan, faithful and rust-parked, sat where I'd left it, a forlorn island in the overgrown driveway. Its engine caught with a cough and a sputter, a welcome, familiar sound that, for a moment, offered a fragile illusion of normalcy. I slammed the gear into reverse, gravel spitting under the tires, and tore down the long, winding drive. The manor loomed in my rearview mirror, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The narrow country road, usually a familiar ribbon of asphalt, felt different. The trees, thick with late autumn foliage, seemed to lean in closer, their skeletal branches forming a canopy that swallowed the last vestiges of light. Fog, thick and sudden, billowed across the asphalt, reducing visibility to mere feet. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I squinted, trying to discern the familiar landmarks, the gnarled oak, the crumbling stone wall, but they never appeared. The road twisted, looped, and straightened in ways it shouldn't, each turn feeling identical to the last. My stomach churned. The air in the car grew heavy, thick with the scent of wet earth and something else, something cloying and sweet like decay. Then the world outside the windshield dissolved. One moment I was gripping the wheel, fighting the fog and the disorienting turns. The next, the asphalt was gone. The trees vanished. The air, instead of damp pine, tasted of brine and diesel. The rumble of my engine was replaced by the low, guttural throb of immense machinery. I wasn't on a country road anymore. Before me, stretching into the mist, was a dark. Its weathered timbers groaned under the weight of something colossal. A cargo ship. Its hull, a rust-streaked behemoth, rose against the impassably vast, grey expanse of a turbulent sea. Figures moved on the deck, indistinct in the swirling fog, a skeleton crew, I thought, their movements jerky, almost puppet-like, as if powered by something other than their own will. They paid me no mind. My gaze was drawn to the yawning maw of the ship's hold, a blackness that seemed to pulse with an unseen current. Something was in that hold, something immense, ancient, waiting. It wasn't a physical presence, not exactly, but a crushing weight of expectation, a silent, ravenous hunger that permeated the very fabric of the air. I felt my own blood quicken, not from fear, but from a profound, primal recognition. This wasn't a random vision. This was a destination. My destination, perhaps. A prison far larger than the manor. A violent shudder racked the car. The dark, the ship, the endless sea, they wavered like a poorly projected image. The thrumming ceased, replaced by a terrible, screeching wrench of metal. My head snapped back against the headrest. The world spun, a kaleidoscope of grey and green and black, a blinding flash, a deafening roar. My hands flew from the wheel. The car lurched out of control. I heard the sickening crumple of metal, the shattering of glass, the scream torn from my own throat. I lay slumped against the passenger door, my body a collection of sharp pains and throbbing aches. The air reeked of burnt oil and crushed leaves. My head swam. I pushed myself upright, every movement a protest from bruised muscles. The car was mangled, its front end wrapped around a massive oak tree. The same oak tree that stood at the very edge of the manor's property. I was back. The air around it felt dense, heavy, charged with an unspoken power. It wasn't just the house. I realized, my breath catching. It was the land itself, the very air, twisted and bound. My escape had been an illusion, a cruel trick. I hadn't even left. The entity's reach extended far beyond the walls, a silent, invisible cage. It had simply shown me what awaited me beyond, a glimpse of a different kind of imprisonment before yanking me back with contemptuous ease. What other depths of its power had I yet to discover? Pact, blood, progeny, anchoram, custodium, evum, anchor, custody, age, and the dates, a chilling litany stretching back through generations, culminating in a date far too close to my own demise, or worse, my transformation. I pressed my palms hard against my temples, as if to physically push the cacophony back, to flatten the rising tide of whispers that now felt less like suggestion and more like direct assault. The manor was no longer just a house. It was a throat, swallowing sound, regurgitating fractured memories. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and sharp, like the taste of fear in my own mouth. I stumbled through the library, the leather-bound journals scattered like fallen leaves, each page a fresh wound. My head throbbed, a drumbeat against the inside of my skull, trying to synchronize with the silent, pulsing thrum of the entity itself. It wasn't just in the house. It was in me, a parasitic cord strumming along my nerves. I could feel it trying to unravel the threads of my thoughts, to replace my memories with its own echoing, formless history. My knees buckled, and I braced myself against a towering bookshelf, the spines of forgotten texts digging into my fingers. This wasn't merely haunting. It was an invasion, a slow, methodical consumption. It didn't want my life. It wanted my mind. It wanted to wear my perceptions, to see through my eyes, to experience this reality it craved, anchored by a human host. It wasn't just feeding, it was colonizing. But why me? Why now? I forced my gaze back to the journals, my vision blurring at the edges. One particular entry, buried deep within a volume on obscure folklore, caught my eye. It wasn't written in the florid hand of my grandmother, but an older, more angular script, almost frantic. It spoke of the vessel of containment, a counter-echo, and a final severance. The language was archaic, veiled, but the desperation was palpable. It described not a defeat, but a temporary reprieve, a binding. A sacrifice, yes, but not of life, of memory. A specific, powerful memory, woven into an object, capable of resonating against the entity's own formless presence. The entry then detailed a location, not a manor, but a port. A forgotten dark, a specific type of craft. It mentioned the iron womb and the sleeping sentinel. My fingers trembled as I traced the faded ink, my breath catching in my throat. It was a place where generations before me had attempted to hide, to sever, to delay. A place where the vessel was meant to be kept, a last resort. The details were sparse, deliberately so, as if the author feared even the written word could betray the secret, but enough remained. A name, half erased, of a shipping company long defunct, a specific pier number. There was no other choice. I moved with a strange, numb efficiency, gathering what few essentials I could. A flashlight, a thick jacket against the biting night air, the most critical journal pages stuffed into my pocket. It knew. It was waiting for my move, for my failure, or perhaps for my success, so it could simply follow. Could I truly escape its notice, even for a moment? The drive to the coast was a blur of headlights and the thrum of the engine, the only consistent sound against the rising tide of internal static. The city lights thinned, giving way to the sprawling, skeletal outlines of industrial docks. Concrete structures loomed, their surfaces scarred by rust and neglect. The smell of brine and diesel hung heavy, a stark contrast to the manor's musty decay. I found the pier number, barely legible on a leaning signpost. A single, weak bulb cast a jaundiced glow on the surrounding grime. Moored at the far end, silhouetted against the bruised purple of the pre-dawn sky, was a rust-eaten hulk. This was it. This was the Iron Womb. The gangplank creaked a low, mournful protest as I stepped onto it, the sound swallowed by the vast emptiness of the port. The ship itself felt like a derelict leviathan, its belly full of forgotten things. The skeleton crew. He offered no greeting, only a grunt and a gesture towards a narrow stairwell leading down into the ship's guts. The ship groaned around me, a symphony of shifting steel and lapping water. Every step echoed, amplified, swallowed. And then I smelled it. The distinct, almost sweet scent of old wood and something else, something that resonated with the manor's ancient secrets. What exactly was I about to find down there, lying dormant for generations, waiting for me? The thick journal page, brittle with age, crackled in my grip. Its faded ink spelled out a crude diagram, a series of symbols I barely understood, but the intent was clear, a severance, a breaking of the chain. My hands trembled, but not from fear, not anymore. This was a tremor of purpose, a current of grim resolve coursing through my veins. The alternative was a silence deeper than death, a dissolution of self. I would not allow it. I moved through the echoing halls of the manor, the flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive gloom. Each floorboard creaked a mournful protest beneath my boots. The air hung heavy and still, thick with the scent of dust, damp stone and something else. A faint metallic tang, like old blood mixed with ozone, growing stronger the deeper I ventured. This was it, the core, the place where my grandmother had kept her most guarded secrets, where the pact had been renewed time and again. The cellar, not the wine cellar, but the deeper, forgotten space beneath it, accessible only through a hidden door behind a collapsed shelf. I'd found it weeks ago, a dark moor breathing cold air. Now, it felt like a destination, my destination. I descended the rough-hewn stone steps, the flashlight beam dancing ahead, revealing walls slick with condensation. The metallic scent intensified, now almost acrid, stinging the back of my throat. I could feel the presence now, a palpable weight in the air, pressing down, humming with a low, resonant frequency that vibrated in my teeth. It was awake. It knew I was coming. At the bottom, the space opened into a cavernous chamber. It was not stone here, but something else entirely. Corrugated metal sheets, rusted and stained, formed the walls, the ceiling, even the floor. Rivets thick as my thumb darted the seams. Strange, I thought, I didn't remember this. This wasn't the manor's architecture. My breath plumed in front of me. I pulled my jacket tighter. The journal page instructed simplicity. No elaborate incantations, just focus, intent, and a symbolic offering. I had brought a small, carved wooden bird, a relic from my wife's childhood, a reminder of what I fought for. My fingers closed around it, the smooth wood offering a strange comfort. I placed the bird in the center of the chamber, on a raised metal platform that looked like a crude altar. Around it, I arranged the few other items the journal suggested, a handful of coarse salt, a cluster of dried herbs, and a single, unbroken mirror shard. Each item felt impossibly heavy in my hand, charged with a strange, nascent energy. As I completed the arrangement, a low thrum began, emanating from the metal walls. It started as a distant vibration, then grew, a deep, resonant hum that filled the space, vibrating through the soles of my boots. Not from the walls, not from the air, but from inside my head. My wife's voice, soft and mournful, calling my name. "William, why did you leave me?" My grandmother's voice, sharp and condemning. "Foolish boy, you cannot fight what is inevitable." Other voices, too, a chorus of forgotten relatives, accusing, pleading, their words a jumbled, disorienting cacophony. My head swam. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block them out, but they intensified, pressing in, twisting my thoughts. This is not real, I told myself. This is the Corail. This is its desperate attempt to break me. I opened my eyes. The chamber was changing. The corrugated metal walls rippled, blurring at the edges. The hanging bulb swung wildly, its light dimming, then flaring with an unnatural, sickly yellow. The air grew thick, shimmering, as if viewed through heat haze. The metallic scent was now overpowering, laced with something else, the stale, briny smell of the sea. My feet felt strange on the metal floor. I looked down. The platform beneath my feet was no longer solid. It seemed to sway gently, a barely perceptible rocking motion. And the hum. It was no longer just a vibration. It was the deep, guttural roar of an engine, far below, vibrating through the entire structure. This wasn't a cellar. This wasn't the manor. My mind reeled, grasping for purchase, but reality itself was unraveling. The walls were now unmistakably the hull of a vessel, the ceiling a low, riveted deckhead. I was in the cargo hold of a ship, a vast, echoing space, far larger than any room in the manor. How? When? The wooden bird, the salt, the herbs, the mirror shard. They were still on the platform, but the platform itself seemed to float in the center of the enormous hold, surrounded by stacked crates shrouded in tarpaulins, their forms indistinct in the flickering light. The engine roar was deafening now, a monstrous heartbeat, and below it something else. A rhythmic thump, 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 like something immense shifting, groaning, from the very depths of the ship. A sound that vibrated not just through the metal, but through my very bones. I felt a sudden, sickening lurch. The ship was moving, fast. My flashlight beam, now feeble and erratic, cut through the gloom, seeking the source of that sound, that smell. It led me to the center of the hold, where the rhythmic thump was strongest. There, beneath a massive, torn tarpaulin, something shifted, something vast, a presence that dwarfed even the ship itself. A single, gaping tear in the tarpaulin revealed a glimpse of what lay beneath. Not a crate, not a machine, something organic. It breathed. I felt its slow, terrible exhalation wash over me, a wave of despair so profound it threatened to crush me. My ritual items, still on the platform, seemed insignificant now, a child's toys against a leviathan. Was this the Corail itself, or merely its vessel? And what did it mean for me to be here on this cargo ship, with a skeleton crew somewhere above, unaware of the horror they ferried? The rhythmic thump continued, echoing the frantic beat of my own heart. What was I supposed to do against that? I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth, the taste of salt and fear on my tongue. The wooden bird, the salt, the herbs, the mirror shard. They were still on the platform, but the platform itself seemed to float in the center of the enormous hold, surrounded by stacked crates shrouded in tarpaulin. The air here was thick, heavy with the stench of brine, stale oil, and something else, a metallic tang that pricked at my nostrils, like old blood mixed with ozone. The ship groaned around me, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the soles of my boots, a living thing settling into its watery bed. My breath hitched. The vastness of the space was disorienting. Shadows stretched like grasping fingers from the high ceiling, obscuring the upper reaches of the stacked containers. The tarpaulins rippled faintly, though no breeze stirred. Was it the ship's motion or something else? A cold, damp chill seeped into my bones, a deeper cold than the sea air. I stared at the items on the platform. They were small, insignificant, yet they pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible energy. A dull glow, like embers on the verge of fading. My grandmother's careful arrangement. The pieces of a puzzle I was meant to solve, or rather, to complete. My fingers twitched, a nervous tremor I couldn't suppress. What exactly was I meant to do with them? A low hum began, not from the ship's engines, but from everywhere at once. It vibrated in my teeth, behind my eyes. It wasn't a sound I could pinpoint, more like a resonant frequency that shifted the very air around me. They writhed at the edges of my vision, promising shapes that dissolved when I tried to focus. My stomach churned, while rising in my throat. Not words, not language I could understand, but a chorus of distorted echoes. Memories, my memories. A child's laughter, a rainstorm against a window, the scent of baking bread. My wife's voice, clear and sweet, drifted through the din, then fractured into 1,000 splintered shrieks. My head snapped up, searching for the source. There was none. It was inside me, outside me, everywhere. The air grew heavier, pressing down on my chest, making each breath a conscious effort. The hold seemed to stretch, then contract, the crates around me blurring at the edges, their solid forms wavering. This was it. This was the chorale of echoes, not a creature of flesh and blood, but a twisting of reality, a devourer of what was real, what was remembered. It was a symphony of despair, feeding on the very fabric of my being. I felt a pull, an unbearable suction at the core of my mind. It was trying to unravel me, to pluck out the threads of my existence one by one. The most vivid memories of my wife, the ones I clung to like life rafts, flared with excruciating clarity, then began to fray, their colors dulling, their edges blurring. It was stealing them, consuming them. I wouldn't let it. Not now, not after everything. My gaze fell on the wooden bird. It felt warm, smooth beneath my trembling fingers. My grandmother had carved it, a memory, a tangible link to something real, something that endured, something it craves, but something I choose to release. It craved memories. It craved grief. If I gave it what it wanted, it would only grow stronger. But what if I gave it something it couldn't fully consume, something that would bind it rather than nourish it? What if I offered it the very source of its power over me, but in a way that severed its hold? My knees buckled. I could taste blood in my mouth, though I hadn't bitten my tongue. My vision swam. I had to act. Now. I clutched the wooden bird in my left hand, its warmth a small anchor in the freezing chaos. With my right, I reached for the salt, then the dried herbs, sprinkling them in a rough circle around the mirror shard. It was a window or a barrier. My mind raced, the cacophony threatening to drown out all thought. What was the sacrifice? What could I give that would banish this thing, but not destroy me completely? The grief. The raw, open wound of loss that had defined my life since her death. It was a part of me, but it was also the gate through which the chorale entered. If I willingly let go of that grief, truly severed its hold, would it starve? The thought was terrifying. But what if holding onto it was only making her memory a weapon against me? What if true remembrance meant letting go of the pain that had become an entity's feast? I squeezed my eyes shut, concentrating. The ship groaned, a deeper, longer sound this time, like a beast in pain. The platform beneath my feet swayed. I opened my eyes. The tarpaulins on the crates were no longer merely rippling. They were heaving, as if something enormous was struggling beneath them, trying to break free. The air was thick with static, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. The true form, not a shape, but a presence that warped space, time, and sanity. A gaping maw of stolen memories and unfulfilled echoes, reaching for me. The endless ache. I let it go. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. It felt like tearing a piece of my own soul away, a violent amputation. I pressed the bird, still warm against the mirror shard, forcing the two together. The light hummed, a pure, resonant tone that cut through the chorale's cacophony. The entity recoiled, its presence a sudden, sharp intake of breath in the vast hold. The heaving tarpaulins stilled. The pressure in the air eased, replaced by a vacuum that threatened to suck the very breath from my lungs. I stumbled back, gasping, my hand flying to my chest, where the pain still throbbed, a phantom limb of grief. The wooden bird and the mirror shard glowed faintly on the platform, surrounded by the blue light of the herbs and salt. The hold was still, silent save for the groaning of the ship. Had it worked? Had I truly banished it, or merely driven it back into the depths, awaiting another generation, another host? And what had I truly lost in the process? The tearing sensation subsided, leaving behind a vast, hollow ache in my chest. It wasn't pain, not exactly. It was an absence, a raw cavity where something vital had been. My vision swam, the intricate patterns on the wallpaper blurring into shifting currents of color. My knees buckled. I caught myself on the polished banister, the cold wood pressing into my palm. My ears rang with it. I stood there for a long time, or perhaps a moment. Time had become a liquid thing, stretching and contracting without logic. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. The air in the house felt clean or perhaps sterile. But in its place was a profound emptiness, a vacuum that threatened to pull me apart from the inside. My fingers traced the grain of the wood. It was real, solid. The house, too, seemed real again, though subtly altered. The light filtering through the stained glass window on the landing was no longer fractured into impassable geometries, but cast familiar jewel-toned patches on the floor. Yet something was different. I pushed myself upright. My legs felt like old timbers, creaking with every step. I walked through the quiet halls, past the closed doors of rooms I'd never truly explored. The house no longer hummed with an unseen presence. It simply was. A grand, decaying monument to forgotten lives. It wasn't just an absence of sound. It was an active, consuming quiet, a sound in itself, pressing in on my skull, making my thoughts echo with unsettling clarity. A strange compulsion seized me. I had to leave. Not just the room, not just the house, but this entire place. The urgency was a sudden, sharp claw in my gut. I didn't question it. My feet moved, one after another. Down the sweeping staircase, across the patterned rugs, past the heavy front door. I fumbled with the intricate lock, my fingers clumsy. The latch clicked. A rush of cool, fresh air met me, smelling of damp earth and distant salt. I walked. I don't remember packing, or even deciding where to go. The next clear memory I have is the rhythmic groan of metal, the slap of waves against a hull. The air was thick with the scent of diesel and brine. My memory of getting here was a fog. One moment, the desolate drive away from the manor. The next, the vast, grey expanse of the ocean. A deckhand, a young man with tired eyes and rough hands, passed me, offering a nod I didn't return. He didn't seem to notice the strange, almost luminous pallor of my skin, or the way my eyes felt like they were seeing through a thin veil. The captain, a burly woman with a weathered face, had found me near the gangplank, she said, just before they cast off. "Lost your way, did you?" She'd grumbled, but her eyes held a flicker of something else, a question she didn't voice. I'd mumbled something about needing to get away to the sea. She'd shrugged, pointed to a bunk in a cramped cabin, and told me to stay out of the way. I did. I kept to myself, watching the endless grey horizon from a narrow porthole. The sun was a pale, indifferent disk. It had merely followed me. It had nested within me, or when I thought I had ripped it away. I found myself drawn to the lower decks, to the heart of the vessel. The crew rarely ventured down there, the captain had warned. Nothing but old machinery and empty crates, she'd said. Best to leave it be. But I couldn't. Down a steep metal ladder, through a narrow gangway, past stacks of industrial equipment shrouded in tarpaulins. My breath plumed in the stale air. Then I saw it. In the deepest part of the cargo ship, skeleton crew, something in the hold lay a single massive crate. No markings, no shipping labels. It just sat there, a monolithic presence in the gloom. And from it I felt it. A faint vibration. A resonance that hummed in my teeth, in the marrow of my bones. It wasn't a sound. It was a sensation, like a vast, sleeping thing breathing slowly, deeply. Not my thought, not entirely. It was a fragment, a reflection, a memory of a promise, of a pact renewed. A shiver ran through me, but it wasn't fear. It was recognition, a deep, unsettling familiarity. The amputation hadn't been a severing. It had been a transfer, a binding. The manor had been merely a vessel, a nexus. I was the new one, the host. My own voice, yet not my own. A chorus of echoes, soft and inviting. Welcome, William, asterisk, I closed my eyes. The ship swayed gently. The deep thrum of the engines continued. What exactly was in that crate? And why did I feel so utterly, profoundly at home beside it?